Okay, evening. Um, Before we get started on continuing with the bracha of Hashiva Shofetenu Kevarishonah, a comment. It's kind of a reply to something that over the course of this class and in the past when I've taught Tefillah, a question that comes up when people stop me and ask me or message me, it's this the question generally boils down to the following. They don't use these words. We learn a lot in this class, which is great. Um, but how do I put it to practice? I mean, if I sit there and I think about all these things we were learning in class, my Shemona Esrei, I'll start it in the morning and I won't finish it until right before Ne'ilah next Yom Kippur. So the point is not to think about every single thing we're learning here when you're davening. You could, but like I say, your Shemona Esrei would be extremely long. But I had suggested early on at the beginning of the class either to have a siddur where you make notes, your comments in the siddur, just a couple words remind you of certain things, a little notebook or something. That's one way. Take, each bracha that we learn, a couple of highlights that you want to note. The other possibility is, and this is something I personally have done at times, is to choose a bracha. Let's just say the very first one. And that one you say much slower. You think about the things we've learned about or that you've heard about before, and you focus on that. You do that for a week, 2 weeks, and the rest of your Shemona say the same length as normal. And then the next week, you go to the next bracha, and you don't necessarily put that same emphasis on the first one, but you put on the second one. And over time, what happens is you will be reinforcing some of the ideas that we've talked about, and it'll stick. Believe me, it does stick. And I know better than anybody else that our minds wander when we say specifically Shemona Esrei. Some of my greatest ideas have come to me in the middle of Shemona Esrei. I go, oh yeah. And then at the end of Shemona Esrei, I forget what they are. And then a few days later, it pops back into my head. It happens. People's minds wander. That's why it's when it's the most important for us to be thinking is when sometimes it's the most difficult. Sometimes we're forced into situations where we have to hyper focus. God forbid, someone falls down and you're there and you have to help them. You're not while you're helping that person get righted up and help with their leg or whatever it might be. You're not saying, well, that's right, I forgot to file my 1987 income tax forms. I better do that soon. You're not thinking that. Well, if you didn't file back then, you got big problems. Anyways, so that's just some general thoughts, general ideas about the question I've gotten many times over the years. We're going to go back. I'm going to just once again just put on the screen the bracha that we're working on, and mention a little bit of the questions because we had lots of questions with very little answers so far. And tonight I said we'll try and answer what I can. When it comes to this bracha in particular, it's true about all the brachot Shemona Esrei, but especially this one. There are many different approaches as to what really it is we're davening for. I'm going to give you one derech, one particular path, so to speak. So let's just reread the bracha and talk about the questions. Hashiva Shofetenu Kevarishonah, restore our judges as at first. And our counselors are to use the word counselors as the beginning at the beginning of the first. Remove from us any kind of sorrow, sighing. And only you, Hashem, should rule over us. With mercy, kindness and mercy. And find us righteous with justice, or make us righteous with justice. Blessed are you, Hashem, the one who loves righteousness and justice. And even if this were not, even if we hadn't learned this bracha before, and I said to you, okay, as I do with everything, look at it for the first time like you've never seen it before. Things start to pop out. Like really, the first overall arching question is like, what's the bracha really about? Who's doing the judging? Are we asking Hashem to judge us? What are these that says Hashiva Shofetenu? That's the word here, Shofetenu, our judges. Yoatzenu is our counselors, like a Yoetz, like Yoetz Mishpat. Who are they? And what does it mean? We want to restore them like the days of old. If you look in some really old English ones, you'll see of days of yore, Y-O-R-E, not Y-O-U-R. And even if it has to do with mishpat, it has to do with judgment. What's going on here that says to get rid of our yagon and anacha, our sighing, our sorrow? Again, the overall question is, what's this bracha really about? Okay, we'll come back to this next slide in a few minutes. So let's start with the question of why are we asking for these judges and advisors or counselors of old? So if we can, in order to understand that, we've seen this already, this formula in other brachot, that one of the best ways to start is to start with the chatima. Chatima, again, is the conclusion of the bracha, melech ohev tzedakah umishpat. Those will almost always give us a key as to what the basic bracha is about. It tells you what the subject is. And what are the two words that it uses? I just said tzedakah umishpat, righteousness and judgment, or justice is probably a better word in this case. Not judgment, but justice. When Hashem tells Avraham Avinu that he's going to destroy the city of Sodom, let's see what he says. Hashem Amar, Hashem said, as kiviyachol, as it were, to himself, am I going to hide from Abraham what I plan to do? Because Abraham was going to become the father of a great nation. And all the people of the earth will be blessed through him. Like there's a connection, like all these people, even though they're not Jewish, I mean, they have a chance to be blessed through Abraham. Like, why should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do to Sodom? For I have singled him out, I know him specifically. That he will give instructions to his children for his legacy after him. He will keep the ways of God. La'asot, and what's the way of God? The derech Hashem means the way of God. What's he translate here? As the way of Hashem, good. La'asot tzedakah umishpat, in order to do what is just and what is correct, or what is righteous and just. Leman havi Hashem al Avraham et asher diber alav. Okay, so what do we see here? This is the first occurrence of this pair of words. Tzedakah and mishpat appear when Hashem is talking about what he's about to do to Sodom. And he talks about the fact that he has to inform Avraham. He says, I can't hide this from him. I have to let him know, because he is the person who's going to perpetuate my vision. Again, I'm summarizing, so to speak, Hashem's words. He's talking about himself. Avraham is going to perpetuate my vision, which is what? To do tzedakah and mishpat. Because that's the way of Hashem. There's a very clear, direct connection in these words here. I should even underline this. Let's underline it, bold it, italicize. What is the derech Hashem besides the name of a sefer? Derech Hashem means the way of God. So we know that Hashem has all kinds of, quote, ways in this world. He's a Rachaman, he's a merciful God, he's a judgmental God, he's a God who is slow to anger, all these things. But in this instance, we're talking about the way of Hashem being tzedakah mishpat, which also means, in a sense, that Hashem is saying, if I don't tell Abraham about what I'm about to do, that would be a lack of tzedakah mishpat as well. So the principles Hashem is saying that Abraham is going to carry on is the principles of God, which are tzedakah mishpat, which he's going to pass on to his family. And he also says about Abraham, ki yadati, literally means I know him. Okay, and here in the English, I think it said he singled him out. Okay, that's nice, but that's not what it says. It says I know him. What does that mean to know? So to know, that verb refers to a very special relationship between Hashem and Abraham. We know, for example, you go back into Sefer Breshit early. This is Sefer Breshit, but early on, Vayida Adam et Chava Ishto, and Adam knew, in quotes, his wife Chava. It meant they had sexual relations, right? But what does it mean? They knew that's the closest connection a person can have with another human being. So it says that Hashem, and that the relationship, so to speak, between Hashem and Abraham is a matter of da'at. We talked about this also. We talked about the bracha, Tachonei Ladam Da'at. It's a connection, the strongest connection. He says that I have this strong connection with Abraham, a personal relationship, so to speak. And therefore, it's no wonder that if you take a look at the beginning, next slide, Sefer Yeshayahu, it says as follows. Limdu hetev, learn to do good. Dirshu mishpat, devote yourselves, really means seek justice, but let's just use the English that's here. I don't particularly care for it. Ashru chamotz, aid the wronged. Shiftu yatom, uphold the rights of the orphan. Grivu almana, defend the cause of the widow. So these are instructions that Yeshayahu is giving to Bnei Yisrael, to Jewish people, the very beginning of Sefer Yeshayahu, and telling them to do these things based on what? What was Yeshayahu just, this is Isaiah. He just pulls these things out of the sky. So we know that there's a concept in Judaism called Mahu Afata. I talked about this, I think, even last week, which literally means just like he is X, so too you should be X. The Gemara says, just like Hashem visits the sick, like we saw he visited Avraham Avinu, so too you should visit the sick. Just like Hashem is merciful, so too you should be merciful. So this is a series of actions that Yeshayahu is calling on Bnei Yisrael to do. It's called imitatio Dei, to imitate God, to act like in a godly fashion. And the first thing he says there in the red is he says to devote yourself. Again, I don't really care for that word, but let's just use it. Devote yourself to justice. The entire relationship between Hashem and Avraham, and then by extension between Hashem and us, is based on righteousness and justice. But then what happens? We throw it all away. Let's take a look. The first at another set of psukim earlier, right after these psukim, when Yeshayahu was talking about the city of Yerushalayim. The wording here is similar to words that are used by Yirmiyahu in this book of Eicha. He says like this. He's talking about Jerusalem. Eicha eta lezona kirya ne'emana, mileti mishpat tzedek, yalinba v'tameratzchim. She's become a whore, the faithful city that was filled, Yerushalayim, that was filled with justice, where righteousness dwelt, and now it's murderers. Kaspecha yalesigim, your silver has turned to dross. Savech mahul b'mayim, your wine is cut with water, cheating. Sarayich sorerim, your rulers are rogues. V'chavrei ganavim, and cronies of thieves. I love this English. Hulo ohev shochad, everyone loves graft. Everyone loves bribery. V'rodev shalmonim, and running after gifts. Yatom lo yushpotu. Now we come to the words that came just a few minutes ago from Yeshayahu, that this is what the model would have been, what we're supposed to do, but instead we're doing the opposite. If he's saying about Yerushalayim, we're doing the opposite. What are we doing? Yatom lo yushpotu. We're not judging the case of the orphan. We're not doing justice for the orphan. V'riv almana lo yavo alehem. And the widow's cause literally means never reaches them, but it means we're not acting the way we're supposed to act when it comes to the widows and the orphans, and in general, acting with proper way. So it would seem to be, therefore, that the extension of that idea would be that Hashem would do some form of cleansing of the city. In other words, this is Yeshayahu. Look at Yeshayahu, chapter 1, where we read on Shabbat Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, is the vision that Yeshayahu has. He says, just take a look again. What is the ideal? The ideal is this slide here. All this idea, learn to do good, devote yourself to justice, aid the wrong. But what has happened, he says, this. How terrible the city that was once fabulous has now become this other. It's not keeping its mission, so to speak. What does that also mean? If we said before that the idea of tzedek and mishpat, or mishpat and tzedek, or tzedakah, with Avraham and Hashem, was linked with the word also of yedativ, or yodea, the knowing, that means that when Yerushalayim, the people of Yerushalayim acted in the opposite way, they're breaking or uprooting that covenant, the knowing covenant, the connection between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael. Let me see, I think I made a slide here just a second. Yeah. So what does he say after that then? No, yes. Now this pasuk is going to sound a little familiar because it's the basis of our bracha. This is still in the same chapter, Yeshayahu. So this is the antidote. There's got to be a cleansing. Cleansing, unfortunately, we know is going to end up being the destruction of Beit HaMikdash and the sending into exile the Jews. But what is going to be the part of that cleansing eventually? Hashiva Shofetenu kevarishona. I will restore your magistrates of old, your judges of old. Your counselors of yours. See, it's here. After that, only then can the Yerushalayim be called yet again the city of righteousness, the faithful city. How? Zion b'mishpat tipadeh. Zion shall be saved in judgment. V'shaveha b'tzedakah, and her repentant ones in retribution. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole pasuk here, but what do we see here? First, we see the framework for our bracha. Doesn't answer our question exactly yet, because what are we talking about? The magistrates of old and the counselors of yore. What does that mean? We'll see in a minute. But before we do, we need to take a little bit of a pause here in parentheses. Now, we'll talk about one word that gets thrown around, but it's not understood necessarily. And that's this word here, Zion. Zion in English is Zion. It's the shorish, the word Zionut, or Zionism. It's the name of Yerushalayim, Zion. But what does it really mean? I'll make the question even stronger. When a person is buried, they have to do, after the person is put in the ground and they put the earth back in, they have to do what's called a tzurat hakever. They have to like scrape out a little the earth around so it makes it look like it's a grave. And that place, when a person can look at it even from a distance, says that's the tziyun hakever. Sounds like the same word. It's spelled exactly the same way. Tzadi yud vav nun. It's this way, tzion, but it's pronounced tziyun. When you get a grade on a paper, when you do a test, it's called a tziyun, also a grade. When you want to point something out, it's l'tzayen. So what's the connection? Zion, l'tzayen, tziyun, tzion. What does this all have to do? So the answer is kind of buried in what I just now said. L'tzayen means to point something out. For example, if I want to say to you, I want to talk about multiple subjects. I'm talking to you in Hebrew, and I want to talk about a bunch of things, but I'll say it in Hebrew and translate. One of the things that I want to focus on, or I want to point out, hukacha is this, whatever. So that tzayim means to point out, like it's the point you want to focus on. So therefore, if there's a graveyard, you want to know where the graves are. First of all, because Kohanim can't go there. In the times of Beit HaMikdash, you'd have to go to get yourself cleansed if you had gone and come in contact with the actual dead body. So there's a tziyun. There's a place, a marker. That's where it is. When a person takes a test, they get a tziyun, they get a grade. Why? It's also in English called a mark. What are your marks on your test? Why? Because it's an indication of where that student is holding, where they are at in that particular topic or that subject. Now, why is Yerushalayim called Tzion? It should almost become obvious. If we want to say Litzayin, it's the point to say the focal point, the point where you're looking at, is everything points to Yerushalayim. Everything revolves around Yerushalayim. Everywhere we daven, wherever you are in the world, we want to face Yerushalayim. So therefore, the word for Yerushalayim is Tzion. It's one of the, I think it's 70 names that Yerushalayim has. And in addition to that, comes the shorish, the root of the word Tzionut, or Zionism. So now you just know a little bit more about that particular word. So that's the end of the parentheses here. But what do you see from this, these psukim here in Yeshayahu? Possibly an opening now to understand the answers to some of our questions. I want to suggest the following, and this isn't me, this I've read in a few places. When we say kivari shona, this word over here, and we say it in our bracha also, and kivat tefilla, which means like at the beginning, at the first, it's not a particular time period before the Beit HaMikdash. The beginning here means the foundation. The foundation that it refers to is the idea of the virtues that Hashem talks about with Avraham Avinu before he destroys Sodom. That's at the core of our relationship. Mishpat and tzedakah, which are personified, nice fancy word, by the words of Shofetayach kevari shona and Yoatzayach kevat tefilla. And therefore, in addition to that, the relationship those words have, and between us and Hashem. They are the tziyun, the mark of the proper relationship between us and Hashem. In other words, you can ask, how does a person know? You do a little introspection. How do I know if I'm doing the right things in life? There are many benchmarks you can check, what are called fancy words, many metrics. I was at a conference many years ago, my early days of my different life, when I was a director of purchasing. And I went to a few conferences on purchasing. And this one guy got up and he's speaking. And this is a great example of what not to do when you speak. He kept using a term that I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. And I guess many other people didn't. Maybe they did. I was just the only, whatever in the crowd. And I didn't understand. He kept talking about metrics. Remember, we're in the United States. What's the United States have to do with metric system? It wasn't until way after that course that I found out what metrics means. That like a form of measuring something, or measure. So there are metrics you can say, are you living up to what you're supposed to do as a religious practicing Jew? I don't like the necessary word Orthodox because that can mean many things, but a practicing Jew. Yes, am I keeping Torah mitzvot? Yes, to the best of my ability. Am I saying my brachot? Am I doing, sometimes I'm messing up? Of course, because I'm human. Do I forget to do this? Yes. Do I do this wrong? Yes. Of course, we all do things that are wrong, things we shouldn't do. That's just the way life is, unfortunately. But big gadol, in the greater scheme, everyone listening to me here is a good person. They do the good things. They try to do their best. They don't always succeed. And you don't succeed today, maybe you'll succeed tomorrow. And if not, then maybe 5 years from now. But eventually, we all, and again, the sachakol, the totality, we do the right things. But what's the basis? The basis is the relationship with Hashem. It's nice to do all these things. I can do all these mitzvot. We talk about this in Tanya many times. I can go through the motions. I can daven. I can put on my tefillin. I can say my brachot. I can treat people whatever. I can deal faithfully in business. But am I really serving Hashem? So tachlis, and one level, at the lowest level, I don't have anything. I don't put God in the equation. No, it's hard to believe, but it's possible to go through a person's whole religious Jewish life and never insert Hashem into the equation. I do it because I could tell you 100%, not so much here, but in the Chutz La'aretz, there are people who go to shul on Shabbat only for one reason. Don't tell me Kiddush, that's a different reason. But it's because it's socially required and necessary. You go to shul, you may watch TV at home on Shabbat, or go on your phone a little bit, but it's socially necessary and required. It is possible, even if you don't be mechalel Shabbat at all, desecrate Shabbat, you keep Shabbat properly, and you daven, and you do your brachot, and you do everything else, but you don't do it for the right reasons. You get points, so to speak, but it's not that high up on the ladder. Hashem wants, and again, we know that there's the idea of mitoch shelo lishma, balishma. You don't do it for the right reasons at first, but eventually, hopefully, you will. But where's the foundation? The foundation is the kavarishona and kivat techila at the beginning. Where's the beginning? The first Jew. First Jew is Avraham Avinu. Remember, Adam is not Jewish and Noach is not Jewish. So Avraham Avinu is the first Jew, and is the first mention of mishpat and tzedakah and yidi'ah. Those three words coming together. Mishpat, justice; tzedakah, righteousness; yidi'ah, knowledge. Again, knowledge meaning in this case, the closest possible relationship you can have. We put all those words together and we have a good formula. What happens though when you have the absence of justice? Then you have a dysfunctional relationship. You have a double dysfunctional relationship. Number one, society doesn't function properly. And number two, the relationship vis-a-vis Hashem doesn't function properly, because that's not what Hashem wants. Yeah, I was going to say an example, but I don't need to. If there is no society, in other words, if there's no society because there's a breakdown because of lack of mishpat and tzedakah, then the justice with a capital J of the kingship of Hashem is also impaired from our perspective, not from God's perspective, God forbid. So what this bracha is really about, and now falls into lockstep with some other brachot we've already seen, is about reconstitution of society, which can then form the basis of the real relationship with Hashem. This should sound a little familiar to you with another topic we talked about. And that's talking about becoming a merkava. Merkava means a chariot. If I take a chariot and I put it out in front of my house, besides the fact that people wonder what is a chariot doing in front of my house, it makes more sense to see a donkey maybe. I put a chariot there. It literally just sits. There's nothing moving it. It's not going anywhere. It has no mind of its own. It just sits. What happens when a rider gets into it and hooks up a horse? Now the chariot goes wherever the driver takes it. The Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, were known as chariot. They were known as the Merkavot, or Merkava. Why? Because they did what Hashem wanted them to do. Mind, body, and soul, everything together. Now, are we able to be such a Merkava? We can't reach this. We can't necessarily reach the levels of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But we also have no right to say to let that chariot to sit there. We have to do our best to make sure that that chariot is moved, so to speak, is being drawn by Hashem, and we go along for the ride. Hashem doesn't take that chariot and we stand there going, bye, thanks, have a nice day. I'm just going to go and put my tefillin on. I'll see you later. Society, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons that the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noachide laws, one of them, and people are very surprised to learn this, is to have a court system. That's actually one of the 7 Noachide laws. You know, if you were to guess what they were, so you'd say, okay, don't steal, don't murder, yes. Don't eat, what's called Ever Min HaChai would never come up in your mind, which is you can't take a live animal and break a limb off and eat it, God forbid. But one of those of the 7 Noachide laws is that you have to have a court system. But why? What's so important? So this tells us on a different plane, because without a court system, without accountability, without, and I'm not talking about judicial review and all that stuff, but just having a proper system keeps society from being chaotic. We talked about that last week, but now we're taking it to the next level. It's because it's also a form of trying to do what Hashem wants us to do in this world, which is to be like Hashem. Hashem acts with mishpat and tzedakah. We want to go back to the original time when that's what it was, what Hashem is discussing in quotes with Avraham Avinu about mishpat and tzedakah, so that we have this. The values are not are integral, let's say, necessary, strong components of our relationship with Hashem. But it's not just based on an individual. We all have our own relationship with Hashem, but it's also based on a society, a social value as a people. And where do we see this? So if you take a look at this next slide, there is a series of psukim that some men will say when they put on their tefillin. Now, by both Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, there's different windings that are made of the tefillin on the finger, right here. The way it's wrapped on the hand itself is different. Some will do like a shin like this, some will do a shin like this, and by Sfaradim, we just have like 2 lines with a cross. But right now I'm talking about when they do the windings on the fingers. There's 3 of them, 1 on the top knuckle, or the middle one, and 2 on the bottom. So it's 1 on top, 2 windings on the bottom. And there's, every time they make a winding, they say one third of this pasuk. It says as follows: Ve'irastich leolam, saying, I will betroth you forever. Ve'irastich li b'tzedek u'bishpat u'v'chesed u'v'rachamim. There's the 2 parts. Ve'irastich li b'tzedek u'bishpat is 1 part. I will betroth you with righteousness and justice, and chesed and rachamim, goodness and mercy. Well, there's three what are they called? Parts of a sentence. Oh my gosh, it'll come to me. So when we talk about, this is from Hosea, not Yehoshua. Hosea is one of the quote 12 minor prophets, known as the Treasar. We mention again tzedek u'mishpat. Now, what does this mean? Ve'irastich li leolam, betrothed me forever. What's the difference in halacha between erusin and nisuim? Erusin means in English we say engaged. If a person gets engaged nowadays, you say hitares, he got engaged, or they have a misibat erusin, or they just call it an erusin, an engagement party. But what is it halacha? When a man gives a ring to a woman, it says, "Harayat mikudeshet li betabat zo," betrothed to me according to the laws of Moses and Israel. Why I know it all by heart. I guess I've done it a few times. That the man and woman, if at that moment, God forbid, they said, no, this isn't right for me, they need a get if they want to separate, but they're not yet considered married 100%. In the olden days, go back not that long ago, maybe just a couple hundred, 200-300 years, even, but for sure in the time of the Talmud, a man would give a woman a ring in front of witnesses, be betrothed to me. They would wait a year, and during that year, would give the man time to make money and the woman to her family to provide a dowry for her. Then after a year, they would get together into the chuppah and they would get married, which is why nowadays we do the ring, we do the harayat, and then the custom is to read the ketubah, which just separates the two parts of the ceremony, and then the actual nisuin, the actual marriage, which is the sheva brachot, that used to happen a year apart. Now it happens only seconds or minutes apart. Unless you're a foolish rabbi who likes to speak 25 minutes on the chuppah between the two parts of the ceremony. What was that out loud? Anyways, so the question I want to ask is, if you have a choice, you could be, quote, married to God forever, or you can be betrothed to God forever. Wouldn't you want to be married? Why ve'irastich li li'olam? You know, I want to be betrothed to you forever. So I heard years and years ago from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, Shlita, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful idea. And it's going to also work in here. If you think back, whether for yourself, for a child, when you got engaged, not when you got married, but when you got engaged. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, look at the ring. And just this, you know, like this feeling of floating on air. I can tell you, it was a fantastic feeling. It's very exciting. It's a change. It's a new life that you just decided to open that door to the beginning of a new life together, but you haven't gotten married. And then, whatever months later, get married, life starts. And then ask yourself, if you've been married more than just a few years, is the excitement that you feel, I'm not talking about the love, which hopefully is stronger today than it ever was before. I'm not talking about the joy. I'm talking about the excitement, the level of, whoa, this is unbelievably so cool today as it was when you got engaged. 99.9% of people say no. Of course it's not. It's not normal. You can't sustain that level of excitement that you have when you first get engaged and you make your first phone calls. You know, who you're going to call first, and you're going to hurt. It depends. Nowadays, you put on Facebook, and everyone knows in 2 seconds, or a WhatsApp group. You know, when we were all getting engaged, for some of us, still a rotary phone with a single line. So who you're going to call first, and all these things. That excitement is impossible to sustain for through 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and plus of marriage. It's not normal. Be nice, but it's not normal, and not how it's meant to be either. But this is what we're saying. That level of excitement and closeness and joy and elation of an erusin, of a betrothal, that's what we want to feel always with Hashem. And what's it predicated on? Tzedek and mishpat. Justice, righteousness, doing the right thing. There is a world of stuff you can build for here on this topic. But what does this really, though, have to do at the moment with Yagon and Anacha? We still haven't answered that. What does it mean? Remove from us sorrow, sighing. Because what happens when we mess up with our relationship? Let's take a mythical couple. They have a good marriage. After a while, things go south. They're not going so well. They go for counseling. And things are so. And then just something happens, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's a lack of trust, or something happens, and the marriage falls apart. At that moment, the feelings, not just of, maybe the sadness that the marriage may be coming to an end, but the feelings of depression, what's it called when you mistrust somebody? Oh my God. When you feel betrayal, the feelings of we were supposed to have a good marriage. This isn't how it was supposed to be. There's this like oy vey kind of feeling. That's the agon anacha. That's the sighing and the moaning. It's not about physical pain. It's about spiritual pain. It's our neshama in a sense saying, look, you messed up the perfect relationship. You're not going to have a better relationship than that which you have with Hashem, but it's up to you. He wants it. Hashem says, I want you. He says it more than a bazillion times. That's no exaggeration. In Tanakh, Hashem wants a relationship with us. How many times more does he have to hit us over the head and tell us? And we sometimes just mess up. And when we don't act righteously, and we don't act judiciously, and we don't act with justice, whether it's in our daily relationships with people or with ourselves, with our families, with our coworkers, with our neighbors, there's a breakdown. It's not just between us and our neighbors or friends or family or ourselves. It's also between us and the relationship with Hashem. And what we want to know is we want to know, in quotes, know Hashem. One thing we didn't mention yet is why is Hashem referred to in this bracha as king? Melech ohed tzedakah u'mishpat, the king that loves righteousness and justice. Melech is not just another name, so to speak, of God. It's the substance of this very bracha. We want Hashem to rule over our society, to have a just society. When we have a just society, we are mirroring Hashem, the Melech HaOlam. He's the king of the universe. The king has the right to mete out justice. The king has the right to mete out righteousness. That's the king's purview. So he's a Melech Ohev. He's not a Melech who's going to make justice in this world. He's not a king who's going to make righteousness in this world. That's up to us. But he's Ohev. He's the king who, that's his purview, loves righteousness and loves justice, and by extension wants us to do it so that we are more like Hashem. I want to segue into just an introduction to the next bracha. Mention a couple of, there's much more to be said about this bracha, but I want to move on already to the next bracha. Just kind of an introduction before we finish tonight. And when Bezrat Hashem next week, we will get more into this bracha. You'll notice that I started off with the bracha with the one word in parentheses. That's the word laminim. And it's not even translated here in English. It stands for, it means apostates. A min mem yud nun is an apostate, one who rejects God. And I put the vav of the lamal shinim, which is how it's said in Nusach Ashkenaz, in big bold letter in red. Okay, I'm going to come back to both of those, but let's just see what the bracha says first. I'm going to do it like Nusach Ashkenaz. V'lamal shinim al tihi tikva, let there be no hope for informers. And all of your wickedness should instantly perish. And all of your enemies, God's enemies, should be cut down quick. You should say in English, it says you should swiftly cut off, you may quickly uproot, crush, rout, and subdue the insolent. Speedily in our days. You're Hashem, crusher of enemies and subduer of the insolent. Interesting English. Okay. Obviously, with this, there's many, many, many questions. Who are Evim? Who are the enemies of God? And how are they any different than Zaydim, the ones who are, it's another fancy name for enemy, but it's more than that. It's what does he say? You're insolent, whatever. Before we do that, I want to talk about just the Vav, because I don't want to talk about this laminim yet, which is what we say in Adot Mizrach. We're going to come back to that next week. Just talk about the Vav. If you look in English, now it doesn't do it here, but if you have, let's say, an Art Scroll or Birnbaum or any other English translation, it almost always will say, and let there be no hope for informers. And by the way, where does this bracha come from? And what's special about it? I should ask that first. We know that Shemona Esrei is called Shemona Esrei because there are 18 brachot. But actually, there are 19. This is the one that was added. We're going to get to the history of that next week, Bezrat Hashem, in this class. But just understand this was not part of the original formula of Shemona Esrei. It was added not long after the original formula, but it was added. We'll see a story about that, who did it. But let's just take a look at this one word here. The very first word says, V'la malshinim al tihi tikva. And to the talebearers, to the informers, let there be no hope. With putting aside for a minute, who are these talebearers? Who are these informers? It's a very weird way to start a bracha or a sentence. If you remember your high school English, you were taught you don't start a sentence with the word and. Okay, you could have a comma before it with the word and then the next clause. Oh, that's the word I was looking for before, clause. So you don't start a sentence with the word and. So what do you mean, and let the malshinim not have any hope? Okay. There's another bracha that has a vav at the beginning. And that bracha says, again, Nisach Ashkenaz, and to Jerusalem, let your, with mercy, you should return. Both mean and. Now the vav, the letter vav in Hebrew has multiple functions. In both cases, the vav means and. In both cases, it means something else, though, regarding the bracha. Here, the vav is a holdover from when the bracha used to be this, laminim villa malshinim. That's the original formula of the bracha. It's till this day how Adot Mizrach Sfaradim will say it. This is how I say it. When it was dropped, which we'll see next week why, to keep it at least in our minds, the vav remained. The vav remained so that we know there was something else that came before it. You walk into my house and I say to you, oh, and by the way, blah, blah, blah. Then what do you mean by the way? What do you mean and? So it must have been we were talking about something a few minutes ago. You came to my house and, oh, and by the way, let's talk about this other thing too. It's a connection to something we already talked about. So this vav has that function here. Again, I'm talking very surface right now. When it comes to Yerushalayim Yercha Barachamim Tashuv, it has a completely different purpose. I think it's my own chidush, my own novel idea. We'll get when we talk about it, but I'm mentioning it now just so you should know there are two brachot that start that way in Nusach Ashkenaz, and they have different reasons for the vav. Bezrat Hashem, we'll do next week with Tefilla. We're going to look first again what these words mean. Why does it also seem so? What's the word? Strong. I mean, you're talking about crushing and pulverizing, destroying and chopping up, so to speak, your enemy, which I think is perfect for today. By the way, you should have in mind Iran when you daven. There's no question. Think about Iran. Think about the mullahs. Think about all these Yamak Shamami there, and all of our enemies, and all the Houthim, and all these other people. Think about them when you say this bracha. If you don't know every word you're saying, we'll talk about the meaning of the words. We'll talk about why did it have the word laminim? What did it mean? Why is it no longer there? Nusach Ashkenaz, and also why of this very strong language. And what is an oyev? What's the difference between an oyev, an enemy, and zaydim, the ones, again, I call it the indolent, insolent, I don't know, insolent. We'll see. Bezrat Hashem, we'll talk about it next week. The week after Bezrat Hashem is Hanukkah, and we'll talk about, I think it's Hanukkah. We'll talk about the classes I'm going to have during the week. I may just give one class for all three of my classes at one night, because I don't like skipping Hanukkah. For those of you who've been with me for years, you know that I have to teach at least one class during Hanukkah, because if we don't, then the Syrian Greeks won, because they wanted to stop learning Torah. And so that's why we'll learn. But maybe just on something on Hanukkah. We'll see. In the meantime, have a wonderful evening, everybody. Shavua Tov, and let's hope for some Besorot.